Okay,
Perfect.
all right. Hello, welcome to the Finnegan Lake Management Planning Meeting. For this is primarily a recording for those that couldn't attend our meeting, but we have a number of resources here tonight to present the results of our recent lake study and subsequent management plan that we'll be drafting, hopefully with your input. Um, so to get started, my name is Ryan Haney. I'm with UW Stevens Point Center for Watershed Science, and we have collaborated with Oconto County and the DNR to do this series of lake studies around Oconto County. And your lake has come up in the rotation. And with that, I'll just get started because I think this presentation will kind of show the background. Let's see. Sorry, it's my first time using a computer. There we go. Okay, so just to give you some context, the Oconto County Lakes Project started about 8 years ago. The idea was to collect baseline information on all the lakes in Oconto County, and based on that information, develop management plans for them with the input of local citizens and associations. The idea of a lake management plan is to be a clearinghouse of information, just a one source document for everything we know about a given lake. And with that, with not only its most up to date information, but that paired with goals and objectives that resource professionals and residents of the area would like to see for the lake. So the planning process, again, we've just completed a 2-year lake study for Finnegan Lake. This is in addition to any historical data that may have existed for the lake or any other data that volunteers or others were collecting. We've been able to incorporate all that into this study. Um, and so for a lot of these lakes in the county, this was baseline information, brand new information. And for some lakes, it was just kind of bringing them up to date or filling in data gaps. So now we're at stage two, where we're developing the management plan for that lake based on the information that we've put together. Part of that process is a public meeting with anyone interested or who uses the lake, who has an opinion about how it should be managed and improved if necessary. There's also an online survey available to anyone that's interested that can also contribute their perspective through that. After we develop a management plan that everyone is happy with, and I will talk about that briefly at the end. The final step is plan approval. So the plan will go on file with the DNR, the county, and with your local municipality, as well as appended to the county's surface water plan, which this kind of instigated this process. There at the bottom is just kind of a pathway for you to find anything you might be interested in on the county website. You can also, I've also had pretty good luck just Googling Oconto County Lakes Project. But if you're interested in looking at drafts or final versions of lake management plans for other lakes that have been in this process, or find a survey for your lake or maybe another lake you're interested in, anything you could want, as well as any of these presentations here will be available on the website there. So lake management plans are administered under NR 193. So they detail what would constitute, as we call it, comprehensive management plans. So a lot of lakes have gone forward with various plans, usually associated with invasive species management or excessive weeds. Those are usually plant management plans, whereas a comprehensive management plan encompasses all these different things so that we get a holistic look at the lake. Um, and so these plans are increasingly required to be in place for grant funding, just to make sure that a group who's looking to take action on a lake has a complete perspective on the health of their lake, and aren't working in a tunnel vision on too focused on one particular issue. Because that can be quite complex. Part of what we've done here is we've began drafting your management plan with the structure and with the structure required, the chapters required, and just dumping a lot of this information that we're sharing here into that plan. And so from there, the parts to be finished will be the goals and objectives and the actions that we're going to take with each of these categories in terms of preserving or improving the lake. So, and again, I'll talk about that at the end. I've already begun to populate that with a lot of suggestions, and we'll have an iterative review process at the end to finalize that. So just to back up a little bit and to see that recognize how lakes work in general. So we all lakes are in this area are generally a result of the last glaciation. So they're about 10,000 years old, and since then they've been filling up over the years with sediment and dying plants and animals, things like that. And that's a natural process for a lake to take. And so it's kind of a one-way route as our lakes get older, and so the big thing to notice is the big thing to know is that we kind of get our lake is what it is, and that the actions we take, most of the actions we take as humans tend to accelerate that process, when ironically most humans would like to try and slow down that process. Again, also before we look at this, just to have a good understanding of the water cycle, it's pretty intuitive, but just to review, we know that water falls down on our landscape as precipitation. Some of that water runs across the surface of the land as surface runoff, and it flows quickly to wherever our nearest water body is. And some of that water gets a chance to infiltrate into the ground and become groundwater. And most of that water is moving to the same place. It's all working its way out of the system. The difference between those two is that groundwater has a lot of storage capacity and can feed our water bodies slowly. They also get filtered as they move through the geology underneath. Surface runoff has a lot of energy to it. The water's here and gone and carries a lot with it, such as contaminants. To those of you that may have just joined, we did get started, but if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt, and we'll take those. There's a few of us here, and I'm just going over real quick the results of the lake study, and then we'll talk about the management plan afterwards. So Finnegan Lake, located in the town of Gillette, why is Finnegan Lake so much different than Christie Lake, not too far away? So there's lots of reasons that make our lakes different, and the age of the lake, the type of geology it's located in, the type of land use around the lake, and then what's going on in and around the lake all affect why you end up with different lakes, and so we've talked a bit about that. So Finnegan Lake, here's a new bathymetric map for Finnegan Lake. This updates the maps that were created back in the 40s and 60s. This is done with sonar now, so it's continuous and a little more accurate, but probably not drastically different in terms of what people imagine for this lake. We've got the deep hole over there to the left. Max depth of 38 feet is what reported, and it looks like the sonar probably got almost to that depth there in the deep hole. And so one of the first categories we'll talk about here is fisheries. And with that, I will hand it over to Tammy Paoli, who is the DNR fisheries biologist for your area. And let's see, all participants. I just gotta stop my share. There we go.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sounds good.
All right. I'll get this rolling here. read a slideshow. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Tammy Paoli, fisheries biologist with Wisconsin DNR and Peshtigo office. I work on Oconto County lakes and streams. Oconto County is split up between myself and my coworker Chip Long, who's also out of the Peshtigo office. So I cover waters south of Highway 64, and also I work on Green Bay and the lower tributaries. And Chip works on northern Oconto County waters and inland Marinette County waters. So just going to run you through a few pieces of information on the fisheries side of things. Ryan covered a little bit of this, talking about Finnegan Lake and kind of the facts about Finnegan Lake. It's considered in our lakes classification within fisheries, it's considered a complex, warm, clear lake. And so it's got about 1.1 miles of shoreline. We did a boom shocker survey on Finnegan Lake in June of 2022, and that was to follow up on some reports of winter kills the winter before and also in 2019, and I'll talk about those results here shortly. Looking back into the old files, Finnegan Lake, there was a previous fish survey that was on file from April of 2003, and that was a pike netting survey. There's been some reorganization within DNR. So previously it was actually covered by the Shawano office. Southern Oconto County was up until about the mid or late 2000s, then when it kind of went to the Peshtigo office. So in the 2003 fish survey, it was a short survey. They only set 2 pike nets for 2 nights in late April. This was later than what we would typically want to do, but they must have squeezed it in during that time. So it was well after ice out. Typically, when you're targeting species like northern pike, you'd want those nets in right after ice out, but they noted that it was several weeks after ice out. But nevertheless, they had some pretty good results. They had 15 northern pike in just those 2 nights. And they recorded 2 walleye, which were adults, and they were likely from recent stockings, 10 largemouth bass, and wow, 849 bluegill. Just an incredible number of bluegill for just 2 nights and 2 nets. And they weren't just all small bluegill. This was the interesting thing to me looking through the old records. They averaged 6.3 inches. And then they also noted some black crappies, yellow perch, pumpkin seed, and bullheads. So quite a neat, productive little lake, at least at the time. Fast forward to where we are now. Well, I guess let me go back in time and talk a little bit about the history first of stocking history. So I threw up some slides showing the stocking history of fish through the years. And I'll just kind of page through these a little bit. You can see there's been quite a bit of emphasis on stocking in recent years, and I'll get into the reasons why that might be. Some stockings were done by DNR. Some were also done by private hatcheries. The bluegill it lists as a federal hatchery because DNR doesn't raise bluegills, but we can obtain them from the federal hatcheries when we put in stocking requests of our own. So now I'll kind of click back to 2020 and 2019. Again, kind of some pretty heavy stockings during that time as well, various species. And then, even going back a few more years, lots and lots of stockings, various species through the years. All these stockings cost a lot of money. So, stocking fish is very, very costly. It can be a very useful tool that we can use to help manage our fisheries. But one of the things that we found was that it had some low dissolved oxygen issues. So it had some winter kill issues that were reported to us. And so we went out there and took some dissolved oxygen readings in the winter of 2022 when the winter kill conditions were reported. And sure enough, we found some dissolved oxygen levels that were, less than ideal for most fish species. Some being that there is a deep hole in the lake, there might be a little bit of a refuge area that fish can escape to, and some may survive, and that seemed certainly to be the case. So it wasn't a complete winter kill. And so to follow up, to even decide if it was a complete winter kill, we went in there in June and did a 1-round electrofishing survey. Again, this wasn't our standard. We have protocols for bass, panfish targeted surveys, and those are 55 to 70 degree water temperature. This was much warmer, a little bit later. And it was also during the daytime because it was kind of an add-on survey amongst all of our other planned surveys. But we are just trying to find out if there's still fish in the lake. So lo and behold, the good thing is there were. So we netted all game fish and panfish for the entire shoreline. Typically, when we would do one of these surveys, we would collect aging structures on fish, but because we had low sample sizes, it wasn't worth it to do that. And again, the survey goal was to follow up on some of those winter kill events in the previous year and in 2019. So what did we find? We found hundreds and hundreds of brown bullheads. We didn't net them all because there's just way too many. We did find one 4.9-inch yellow perch, one northern pike, 13.4 inches. So that was promising to see. A couple of pumpkin seeds and a couple of bluegill. So, as you can see, shocking 1.1 miles of shoreline. This is not what you would expect to see in most lakes. This isn't a good thing to see. We're happy to see at least some game fish and panfish still in there, but certainly not to the numbers that you see. And bullheads are a lot more tolerant of low oxygen, so that's likely why their numbers were incredibly high during that survey. So that is one of the reasons that we kind of, even after the 2019 fish kill and after this fish kill, we were doing some fish stocking, but especially after that 2022 fish stocking, we said, hey, stocking fish is a lot of money. It costs private entities, it costs the state, it costs everybody a lot of money to stock fish. And so talked with some folks on the lake, Gary, and said, we're not going to put in a stocking quota of our own at this time unless the lake is able to kind of do something about this fish kill, winter kill history. So we got them some information on aeration. Gary just took and ran with it, hooked up with Jim Lamers from Pickerel Lake in northern Oconto County, who also recently, fairly recently, I guess it's been quite a few years now, installed an aerator up on Pickerel Lake. Talked through some of the designs, where to buy this thing from, the plans. There was permitting involved. They received some grant money, I believe, to do this. And so that essentially this aerator helps to create an open water on the lake. And the idea is to at least create some kind of a area where the water, can mix and there can be oxygen infused into the water. And so there could be still a kind of a refuge area for fish. So the aerator was installed this past spring and early summer. There are 3 diffusers that run out on the lake, and so a private landowner was luckily willing to allow this electric compressor to be located right on their property line, and so that was installed. And so this past winter was the first winter it was in. Haven't heard anything negative, in fact, only nothing but positive things so far. Haven't heard of any winter kill at all. So hopefully this will help kind of get around some of those issues with winter kill in the lake, and maybe someday in our near future we can see some of those numbers kind of restoring back to that 2003 timeframe. So with that, that's all I really have. And at this point, I guess I'd be happy to take any questions related to fisheries before we roll back to the rest of the talk. That'll get into a lot of other information on the lake.
Tammy, any theories on why, I mean, a winter kill in Finnegan? Um, there, I hasn't been one before 2019 that we know of.
There was some history of partial winter kills looking back into the files. And so certainly wasn't as prevalent as the next lake that we'll talk about at our next meeting later tonight, Moody Lake. But there was a little bit of history and some mentions of winter kill in the past. And so, sometimes these winter kills can happen. It is a bit unusual with how deep the lake is, actually. So often these
Yeah,
happen in more
yeah,
shallow lakes. So the fact that it had been happening more and more recent is a bit, kind of a head scratcher.
okay.
But often they can happen when you get early ice and very, very long ice. And if you have a lot of plants and decomposition happening in the lake, those plants are using up oxygen as they're decomposing all winter long. So as your winter is progressing and the plants are decomposing, the oxygen is starting to deplete. And if you have a late ice out or just a long period of ice, this can certainly exacerbate the winter kill issues.
Sure.
So yeah, it's the fact
Yeah, I
that
don't
it
know what
has
the
a
average
deeper
depth of
hole.
Finnegan is, but that deep hole may be misleading.
Right.
If the large parts of the lake are too shallow.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
thinking back to your colorful map there that you had
I
early
was trying.
on,
Yeah.
a lot of
Mhm.
it is very, very shallow. And I remember when we were driving around with the boom shocker, we couldn't really get very close to shore because, it's a lot, very shallow, very mucky bottom. And so, yeah, it's really not, it is misleading when you think about the acreage, but yeah, most of that really is quite shallow waters.
Cool. Any other questions for Tammy? Anyone? I think she'll be around if something comes up. So, um, Gary, it looks like you joined us. That's you're hosting our aerator there. It looks like, huh?
Looks like you're muted.
No, the
Oh,
person that's hosting the aerator is David Dirks.
Oh, okay, okay. And
Gary
not
owns
that that matters, but yeah, just good.
Gary owns acreage on the lake.
Okay, okay.
Gary Wendorf does.
Gary Wood. Yep. Cool. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some changes with the fishery. Like I say, Tammy will probably stick around. I will continue on with some of the other stuff we got from the lake study. Some of you, let me see here, share. Um, for those of you that joined us kind of late, yeah, we just got started. We were just talking about the Oconto County Lakes project. We had looked at this map. This was a new sonar-based map of the lake that seems to show nothing, too profoundly different than the old map, other than this is a little more accurate and continuous. And then we just kind of got right into the fisheries. So next, I'm going to, and just so you know that we've done this lake study, and at the end here, we'll talk about how we package all this into a lake management plan with you guys. So the next thing I'm going to talk about the water quality and again what we've measured there and how things look. One of the most fundamental measures of water quality is just the clarity, which we measure with a Secchi disc like this. Some of you may have seen it. It really is just a depth at which the disc disappears in the water, and that water clarity can change daily in a lake. So individual measurements aren't worth as much, but an assimilation of measurements over time is a really inexpensive, easy way to keep an eye on changes in your lake. and it's easy and cheap to do. When we look at water clarity measurements for Finnegan Lake, this is everything we were able to find in the history. So up here in 21, 22, those are measurements from our more recent study. And then we've got older measurements going back to about 2013. So we've got some shallower measurements and deeper measurements. It looks like it fluctuates. I would say this is an extremely limited number of measurements, so that's why it looks, as variable as it does. But statistically, when you look at that, it's a pretty stable line there. So not to suggest there hasn't been much change in at least the 10 years of water clarity that we've been looking at there. When we look at our limited data up there in the upper left in terms of the seasons, June, it appears to typically be the best month for clarity, and then by August is pretty poor, and then May just before that. The May there would probably be looking at overturn, which I'll talk about in a minute. So another thing we look at each time we go out and sample a lake, not only do we collect a water sample, but we have a few different instruments that we lower down and we take some measurements. Dissolved oxygen is one of those, temperature, some things like that. And so when we look at the results of this, it shows us some things. Nothing too surprising here, but this is temperature first of all. And so just to orient you to this graph here, we have depth going down the side there, so the surface of our lake is at the top, and then temperature going across the top. So each time we go out, we start measuring temperature at the surface of the lake, and then we measure it every few feet as we go down. And you can see this pattern that develops most of the year. We get this big swooping. So we end up with measurements that are similar to our air temperatures, say 70, 75 degrees. I try to get out on the 75-degree days if I can. And so our water temperature is pretty similar there at the top. But then once we get down to about 10 or 15 feet, that water temperature drops off significantly, down until we get to about 20 feet where it starts to stabilize again. And what this is showing is it's showing our warmer water on the surface of the lake that's being warmed by summer temperatures and just the air outside, and our colder water below that's mainly the temperature is regulated by the springs and the groundwater coming in, which is usually 40 to 50 degrees. And so those two temperature gradients cause a separation between water on the top and water on the bottom. And this leads into what we're talking about with our dissolved oxygen. You have a large mass of water there on the bottom that strongly stratifies in the summertime. And so that water on the lower end does not get access to new oxygen, whether from the surface or from plants growing, things like that. Now, a couple of times a year, you get these lines here that are relatively straight compared to those big S curves we had, and those are the times of year when it's getting colder out. So late fall, early spring, and our temperatures are more similar from the surface to the bottom than they are in the summertime. That's significant because it also affects our oxygen profile. So this is dissolved oxygen in Finnegan Lake. Again, mirroring just the temperature graph we just looked at. We take an oxygen temperature every few feet as we go down. We've got depth going down here on the side, and our oxygen concentrations up there on top. In milligrams per liter, it depends on temperature, but 8 to 10 milligrams per liter is considered relatively saturated. So again, up here at the surface, your water is pretty much saturated with oxygen. And then as you go deeper and deeper, the water has less access to oxygen. So your oxygen concentrations drop off. And that tends to mirror, again, you see this same 10 to 20 foot range here. That's our thermocline that we just looked at in the last graph with temperature, where our surface water that gets mixed and reoxygenated gets separated from water here at the bottom that doesn't get new oxygen. This red line here is 5 parts per million of oxygen, milligrams per liter. That's kind of a threshold. Below 5 parts per million is when various fish species start to get stressed. And so you can see here's several events that we were out there measuring where even all the way up the surface, we were just barely getting to 5 parts per million. And this is be indicative of a fish kill here, certainly. Then one other thing I want to point out is as you come down and then you get these big bumps in oxygen here, right around 15 feet, right before the thermocline. That's algae blooms occurring right above the thermocline. And so even though you may not be seeing algae blooms occurring at the surface, and certainly I've never heard reports of any toxic algae or anything like that in Finnegan, there is enough nutrient and enough available in the water that there are definitely oxygen blooms occurring at depth. The problem with an oxygen bloom is that means plant growth, algae growth, things like that. Plants and algae die, and that consumes our oxygen later in the year. So when we look at nutrients, this is kind of like water clarity and temperature. Nutrients is one of those other vital signs we look at on a lake. So phosphorus and nitrogen primarily. These are all natural in the environment. They're all necessary for life. We get into trouble on some of these lakes when we get too much phosphorus and nitrogen. And nitrogen is a little more ubiquitous. So phosphorus is the one we tend to zero in on a little more. There's natural sources for phosphorus, such as the sediment itself in the lake. Anytime plants or animals die, anytime sediment runs into the lake from the shore, that's all sources of phosphorus. Septic systems, things like that, those are also sources of phosphorus. So if we see we have too much phosphorus, then we take steps to mitigate those various sources. So here's a graph of our phosphorus in yellow and our algae concentrations in green. And again, we've got data going back to 2013. It looks like a study may have occurred back then. I'll revisit that for the management plan. But you can see that red line there is our NR 120 phosphorus standard. So Finnegan is a deep seepage lake, stratifying as it does, being 38 feet. And so 30 parts per million for phosphorus is a threshold for such a lake where you start to begin to see adverse impacts if you're above that. And so you can see in our study period down here in the early 2020s, we had a couple of our samples above that standard. And similarly, we had some algae concentrations that were also elevated. So for the most part, we are below that standard. Statistics on this limited data would suggest that those concentrations are going down from 10 years ago. But continued monitoring would tell us that. We look at things like potassium chloride and sodium in the water, mainly because in and of themselves, those things aren't too harmful to the lake, but they don't occur in the lake naturally. So if we see concentrations of those, that's a good indication of some sort of pollution. But those concentrations were all low, so that's good. There's a good buffer for the most part around Finnegan Lake. We'll look at that in a second. One weak link might be the boat landing, so we can talk about that at the end too. So we look at the watershed of Finnegan Lake, and just to revisit, a watershed is the area of land that's draining to the lake. So a watershed can be thousands of square miles or just a few square miles. But again, when we talk about like surface runoff and things like that, our watershed is basically what is influencing the character of our lake, because our watershed is slowly moving towards our lake, whether we're here or not. So the lake is a reflection of what's going on in its watershed. When we look at Finnegan Lake, we delineated the watershed primarily based on topography for Finnegan Lake, and the 193 acres is the area draining to there, which is relatively small for a lot of lakes. A small watershed a lot of times is good. Because it gives, when you need to make management decisions about your watershed, it's less area to have to deal with. But immediately, it's obvious that a large portion of the watershed is characterized as agricultural crops or or hay or something like that. And so, of course, that's always the poster child, right, for phosphorus into our lakes is the farming country. And so again, we've got when we model that 3/4 of our land area is agricultural. That would be responsible for about 98% of our phosphorus contributions to that lake. So habitat near shore, this is another category that we look at. And again, this is just the shoreline interface. This is the most sensitive part of the lake. Is called the littoral zone, and that's where most of the lake life and the action in the lake is taking place. Most animals, whether they're spawning, reproducing, feeding, most of that takes place in and around some sort of structure, whether it be floating plants or down trees, something like that. And that's our shoreland area. And of course, that's where humans want to be too. So again, we really focus on that near shore area because it really is 90% of what's going on in the lake is just in that area. Also, just to make you aware, there is a state shoreline zoning ordinance, basically for areas within 75 feet of surface water. And it's very technical. It goes on and on for pages and pages. So you can look into that if you're interested. I just like to make most people aware of what the intent of the ordinance is just to keep some sort of buffer between the land and the lake. So whether that's a more manicured buffer that you design with your aesthetic in mind, or it doesn't mean necessarily having to let things go wild, but having some sort of vegetative buffer and then also in shallow aquatic plants present is kind of the package there. So when we look at the shoreline health of Finnegan Lake, it's by far better than most. We've got about 96%. It looks undisturbed shoreline. The small tan circles there are woody debris, so trees in the lake, logs in the lake, things like that. That was measured at about 100 logs per mile, so that could see a little improvement. We usually recommend about 250 logs per mile. Pre-settlement might have been more in the order of 500 logs per mile, just for perspective. So again, there's this general intent to leave that structure in the near shore area because that's where the lake is happening. But 9 lots on the lake, and overall about 4% of the shoreline was measured as disturbed. And if you were to refer back to the shoreline zoning ordinance, a lake like this would have potentially up to 15% disturbed to still be compliant. So you guys are looking good in terms of you have a lot of natural shoreline. Just a plug for restoring natural habitat. It can be done in creative and very pretty ways and serve quite a function. Also, just to give a plug for native plants, the little red square, this is a scale drawing of various species from Wisconsin, and that little red square there on the left is Kentucky bluegrass. So when we look at the anti-erosion and nutrient removal capabilities of native plants versus things like our lawns, it's a pretty substantial difference. Another way that you can serve the lake, and this is especially true for Finnegan, which appears to have some elevated nutrient, is just reducing the overall runoff in the watershed and increasing infiltration. As we saw at the beginning, if we can get more water to infiltrate into our groundwater, that gives that water a chance to filter through the soil and is a water storage for when times are drier. There's also best management practices for producers in the area, such as cover crops and reducing runoff from agriculture, and reducing runoff from highways and roads and things like that. So there's a lot of new best practices out there right now, and not everything has to be implemented at the shoreline. We can work within the watershed to improve our lake's health, but it doesn't happen overnight. Aquatic plants. So, aquatic plants are obviously an important part of the lake. They kick off oxygen and much needed oxygen into the lake through photosynthesis, and they are food and structure and habitat all of our for all of our critters. And we can tell a lot about the various aquatic plants in our lake. So if we look at the various species and distribution of aquatic plants, as I always say, a good plant person could probably tell you more about a lake than I can with my chemistry samples. So the types of plants and the distribution of plants are very informing on a lake here. So the way we measure plants here is with what's called a point intercept survey. And so we get a grid that's placed over the lake here, and each one of these points has a GPS location. So we navigate out to that point. We lower a rake down and pull up whatever we can off the bottom, and we inventory the plants and stuff on that. So there were 96 points for Finnegan Lake, relatively small lake. This was done in July 22 by the DNR. 45% of the sites they went to had vegetation, and they did observe milfoil at 3 of those locations. This is a rake fullness map, so you can see our diagram there to the right, where you have the 3s. You obviously have an abundance of plants, and then there's a big area there out in the middle where it's too deep for plants. What's nice about these surveys is they can be redone, so you can compare apples to apples, go out there in 10 years and do another plant survey and monitor the exact same locations and really look at how things may or may not be changing. So 15 different species were identified in the plant survey. Usually we think of more plant species as good because it's a sign of diversity and just a good robust health, but there's also value in the types of species that are found. Some species are more sensitive to disturbance, such as the coontail. You can find that anywhere, so it gets a low C value if you look up in that table there of 3. But then there's other species such as the southern naiad that's a little more sensitive, and you're only going to find that in places that are doing well, that are healthy. And so when you see those higher C values, that's good. When we look at the number of species compared to all the other lakes in the survey down there at the bottom, we can see that we're below average in terms of the other lakes in Oconto County for the the diversity in the lake. Again, that'll be more significant in future surveys when we can look at are we going up or down? Is the diversity increasing? Is it decreasing? Things like that. Most common plant was coontail, found at 3/4 of the sites. Coontail's it's a good plant. It's a help, but it can form thick mats. It's sometimes confused with the milfoil, and it can be a navigational nuisance sometimes, but other than that, a good plant to have around. And then milfoil is also present, as this is the famous invasive in Wisconsin that has taken over lakes and ruined them. Milfoil is present in Finnegan Lake, but probably not going to become a significant problem in a lot of areas just because of the depth of Finnegan Lake. There's large areas where you don't even get plant growth. So it may begin to populate some areas of the shoreline, which is unfortunate, but it's continued monitoring is necessary. You can get in real deep fighting milfoil. So if it's not going to become too big of a problem, sometimes it's best just to kind of accept it. It's very hard to get rid of. Only a couple lakes have ever successfully gotten rid of milfoil, and many lakes spend a lot of money trying to fight it. So something to keep an eye on. Other invasive species in Finnegan Lake are the banded mystery snail, first found in 2015, as well as the Chinese mystery snail. These are invasive snails. Most lakes, they don't become too much of a problem. And again, no real known remedy for those. Phragmites was also observed. I'm not sure what the state of that is on Finnegan Lake, if it has been where that was located, or if it has been addressed. But for your management plan, I'll see what else I can find. Recreational issues, there's no wake anytime. This lake is less than 50 acres. The boat landing is owned by the town of Gillette. It's a great boat landing. I've been there quite a few times. Nice little picnic area. The one thing I would say about the boat landing is it is a funnel from that road and down that hill for material just to run straight into the lake. So if there was some sort of, one thing we might think about is some sort of curb or, water diversion just to eliminate that direct runoff. But other than that, it seems very well taken care of. Here's some contact information. This is just Ken, Dale, and I, who are all on here tonight. But this doesn't include Tammy Paoli, who spoke earlier. We also have Derek Thorne, who's your invasive species coordinator for the multi-county area there, who's listening tonight, and Claire Hetzel, who works with Brenda Nordine, and maybe a name lake biologist for the area. And so with that is the results of our lake study. If anyone has any questions or would like to discuss anything, we're available for that here now for the next few minutes. But in terms of the lake management plan, again, I've started that structure. I've started a draft of it, and I've begun populating it with things, ideas and possibilities based on what we've seen here. And so going forward from tonight, we have your emails from participating in this. So I will be sending out a draft of that plan to all participants here, as well as the DNR and various folks, and looking for comment on that. Feel free to pass that draft around to other neighbors or other folks that you think might be interested. And we'll just kind of have an iterative back and forth for a while on that plan. Respond to me with comments, or give me a call to discuss something, or any of the other resources here. Again, we'll have a few iterative drafts based on your responses. And once we have something everyone likes, we'll push it forward and have it out to the DNR, and so it'll be in place. And so that's kind of our plan. You're welcome to take over as much of that. I'll give you that draft again. It's got all the NR 193 stuff kind of in place, and so I really just look for your comment on if you like the things that are in there. If there's anything I missed, anything I got wrong, I'll hear from you. Occasionally there's a typo in there, but you don't have to worry too much about it.
Ryan, just to jump in here quick. My name is Ken Delata, for those that don't know me, with the county. And you guys all got on late, but this summary will be posted on our website. So anybody that wants to see it, it's also recorded, and they can watch the presentation. So I know Gary Hogus, I thought, would be on here, seeing he was big into the with the club and stuff, but he did not call in for a link. But you guys want to share that with them. But anyways, whoever, it will be recorded and on our website, and also the summary will be, and eventually the draft plan. So,
and the management plan contains everything I just showed you tonight. And so that'll all be in there with context. So even if you didn't see tonight's presentation, the management plan should be a pretty good document to follow. But definitely share that around, pass it around to anyone who's interested in contributing to that. And just give Ken a hard time if there's anything in there you don't like. anyone have any questions? Anything you want to talk about? Aerator's working, so hopefully that makes a difference. I think that's kind of the biggest thing going on. And then yeah, looking at some improvements in maybe in the watershed or the runoff, because it looks like we're getting a little too much nutrient, which might be growing a little too many plants, which is why we're getting our low oxygen in the winter. So that might be the solution, but again, it'll take them some time to see a difference there. So
Yeah, and I guess I can point out also that I know you got your club that is basically your association there doing the work and whatever. But
what's the club, Ken? Sorry,
I think it's the Finnegan Lake Sportsman Club, is it, or
is it Sportsman's Club?
is it a fisheries club or sportsman club?
Finnegan Lake Walleye Club, I believe.
Oh, Walleye Club.
Walleye Club.
That's
Okay.
it. That's it. I knew there was something with fish in it.
Yeah.
But no, if you guys are interested in doing anything, even with like diverting runoff and stuff like that, we've got programs that we can take and design that stuff and then find cost sharing for it. Not 100%, but we can usually find some decent funding for projects like that and work with the town and everyone else, the clubs and stuff. So just something to keep in mind. Any of that stuff around there.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. Again, this is recorded, so you point people towards the county website for all that good stuff. The lake management plan I will email out, but there will also be a copy of it on the website too, if that's easier. So with that, don't hesitate to call if you have any questions, and we'll be in touch.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, everyone.